for this project, we're going to be using harness leather. A strip here with some natural, fat lines, crease lines within it. It does have a very clean back. This is what we're going to be using for this project. Now, particularly for some of these tutorial videos, I am a little bit guilty of using leather all the way up to the edge. I kind of like some of the extra character that goes on some of the edges up here. Not everyone feels the same way, but this may or may not be something that ends up going into the online store. But for the purposes of this video, we are going to make sure that we try to use as much as we can, like as much usable leather as we can for this particular build. Again, this is the Starr wallet series. It comes in either 2 or 3 pockets currently. We could easily add a 4th pocket to the outside. Just haven't done that just yet. But we're gonna go ahead, and I probably really need to make this paper template into something a little bit harder. Cardstock would work out well. Acrylic template would be even better. Let's work on that. But for the purposes of this particular build and this particular demonstration, this will work out just fine. Let's take our time and make sure that we go around the edge of the project with this trace. And we only need 1 of these pieces, so we're going to set that aside now. And this one happens to be within some cardstock, so this might be a little bit easier for us to trace out. It was a little bit warm in the garage workshop tonight with the fan on low. I had the AC on earlier, but it just gets a little bit loud for filming with that on. We will work for a little bit. We might take some breaks just from a fan AC usage perspective, but as I'm sitting here working, I appreciate the folks that might be tuning into this particular video. Definitely want to try to help show some basic concepts for leatherwork now, and I'll tell you, I'm still learning, and this is still very much a hobby for me. I have started to sell, getting progressively happier with the product that we're putting out. Definitely still very much in the figuring out like what we want to have as a consistency within some of our lineup that goes on the website. But here it is traced. We're going to come back here in a minute. We're going to get this cut out, and we'll be back here in just a couple of minutes. Do have to remember to keep your finger out of the way. I did lose the tip of my finger at one point. It was a highly unique piece with, blood all over the project. And I did throw it away, obviously. Didn't sell that one, didn't keep it. But it was certainly something for me to remember, and a good reminder to make sure I keep my fingers out of the way. Also, a sharp blade is your best friend, not necessarily a dull blade. I did change this X-Acto blade out before I got started. Okay, so now that we have everything cut out, now we have to start to attend to some of the edges. We have a couple different ways and a little bit of a process that we go through here in order to make our edges look nice and neat and clean. First step after we kind of cut everything out is I want to go through and I want to sand off any imperfections. So I might go through and I might just initially do a quick sand. If there's a minor flaw here, you can sometimes take this edger tool here, try to put that in the camera. And you can maybe then start to address where you might need to cut off anything just a little bit extra. Maybe, you know, maybe your cut as you were going all the way through, maybe you paused right here and you didn't quite get that curvature on here that you were looking for. That's okay. It can definitely be fixed. If it can't be fixed with just this little curvature tool here, then it can be fixed with a little bit of sandpaper. So that's the first step when we're dealing with our edges. And we want to make sure that we deal with these edges here, because once we tack this down with our cement, then we're not going to be able to attend to them. We're not going to be able to burnish those edges. So once we get everything sanded down, maybe put a little bit of gum trag on it to try, or some water to lay it all in one direction. The other thing that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to, this is an edger tool. This is a zero edger tool here. It's just going to barely take a little bit off the edge just to kind of round some of these corners. We'll show you what that looks like when that's all done. And then what we do with that is we have some burnishing solution. We very carefully apply that on. We use a little bit of a canvas cloth and this burnishing tool in order to clean up some of those edges. So we're going to do a little bit of sanding, and we'll meet back here in just a few minutes. Trying to keep this video not really long. It's not a long project, but definitely want to show you the highlights as we're putting this together. So let me do a little bit of edge work on this, and we'll meet you right back here. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry for a little bit of the audio voiceover here. I was having some technical difficulties with my microphone, but you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm measuring out some white thread. Usually when I measure out thread, I will go around one time with the exterior of the project. Take that length of thread and then times that by 4. So measure that out 4 times. That's generally what you're going to need to ensure that you have enough thread to go all the way around your product with the saddle stitch. And here now we're just, we've loaded the thread into the needle. We have 2 needles, 1 on each side, and we're going to try to do the simple saddle stitch. I do the saddle stitching a little bit differently than what some might do. I tend to get, sometimes I kind of wrestle with kind of piercing the thread, so to speak. So what's really important to remember as we're doing the saddle stitch is that we're going in one end. As we're here, we're pushing that needle through, then we're going to move it out of the way and kind of pull it a little bit. So we're going to then take the other needle to go behind it. That's going to help keep us from essentially piercing through that other piece of thread that went in, because we don't want that. That's not what we want. So what we end up here doing then is just kind of going through the same process, kind of repeating everything all the way through to the end of the project. Don't worry, I'm not going to have you watch me do this the entire time. I am pretty darn good at saddle stitching. I've gotten so much better over the last year or so. I'm really happy with a lot of the product. And honestly, the stitching pony kind of helps in that regard too. But it's the consistency that is super helpful. And here, when we're all done with stitching, you can see that we have everything laid out. It's all stitched up, and what we're going to do now is attend to some of these edges. And we have 3 different types of sandpaper there, some coarse, some not so coarse, and some pretty fine. I will go through and I will make sure that everything is as even as possible. And sometimes this is the time if you need to grab your knife and maybe do a little bit of a trim. If it's not quite right or too much to sand off, now's the time to do that. Go around through with multiple grits of sandpaper, trying to get everything even, but then you're going to want to go through with the finer stuff and get it all in one direction. Get all those leather fibers laying down in one direction. So the other thing that we also want to make sure that we are attending to here, sometimes when we sand, we get a little bit of these mushroomed edges over the side. I did tend to some of these mushroomed edges before I got on camera. My apologies for that. I forgot to include that in the video segment. But sometimes when you sand, you get these mushroom or these edges just kind of pop up. Now would be the time to kind of go back and do that again if you need to attend to those. So you're using a beveler tool and you're just beveling, just kind of very lightly rounding out those edges. And then here we're putting everything in one direction again. So we're just making sure that all those fibers are laying in one direction. The next step after we get everything sanded down is we want to make sure that we are burnishing these edges. So I have some burnishing solution. There are a lot of different things you can use. Some people use gum trag, some people use toconol. I think this is the Tandy burnishing solution that I have been trying. Seem to like pretty well. But one of the things with this, we want to make sure that we're kind of gently, kind of a thin layer applying it to our edge. I don't necessarily want the burnishing solution to get on the leather itself. Some of it might just kind of inherently do so because you are putting it on there, then you're kind of creating some friction with your burnishing tool and it might spread and kind of spill over the side just a little bit. So take your time with this, and you're going to want to make sure that you're just kind of going little by little, step by step, to try to reduce some of that spillover. But in the video here, you see we're putting some of this burnishing solution on, and then we are going to grab the wood slicker. And what that will do is just provide some friction, some back and forth movement, providing some friction to try to get a little bit of that. Not necessarily a shine. It can be a shine. Some people do take quite a bit of time to really kind of gloss up their edges. A lot of my projects don't necessarily, I think, require that high glassy gloss. They're a little bit more rustic, but even just as we see the video here, you can see some of the difference in the finished and the unfinished edge. So what we're going to do here within this video, and again, I won't have you or make you watch the entire thing, but we're going to kind of fast forward here in just a little bit so you can kind of see what the finished product looks like.